Sometimes stories in the news make you wonder, who's making all the decisions? I mean, who's really pulling the strings? There are chemicals being used that we know cause serious illnesses and contaminate the environment. Why are they still being produced when safer alternatives are out there? Where's the regulation?
The EU's legislation regulating chemicals is not sufficient to determine whether substances have endocrine disrupting properties and lacks data requirements. The matter is being taken very seriously by the European Parliament, where a resolution was adopted in 2013 in order to identify and ban harmful endocrine disruptors. The potential risks to health are great, including cancers and developmental abnormalities for newborns.
La pression que nous devons faire sur la Commission doit être totale. D'un côté, contre nous, nous avons un lobbying effréné de la part de l'industrie chimique en Europe. Ça, il faut l'avoir en tête.
Lobbying in Brussels is big business, and they've got it down to a fine art. Office space isn't cheap here, but it pays to operate close to the heart of power. The Amazon electronics producer, Thales, the chemical giant BASF, Deutsche Bank, Unilever, Shell, Vattenfall, General Electric, Axiom, BP, BNY Mellon, Rolls-Royce, Imperial Tobacco Group, Microsoft, British Airways. All these large corporations have their very own office dedicated to lobbying within the few square kilometres surrounding the institutions. And they're not alone. When several companies are after the same thing, weaker regulations, avoiding a ban that might hinder business, less stringent workers' rights so they can make bigger profits, they'll work together through an umbrella organisation. There are more than 1,000 in Brussels representing pretty much every industry you can imagine. Sometimes corporations pay a public affairs consultancy or law firm to lobby the institutions on their behalf. It's a lucrative business. Burson Marsteller, for example, employs 60 lobbyists to influence EU decision makers for clients like Nestlé, Danone and Bayer, and has an annual turnover of over €8.5 million. An objective-looking study or report from an academic-sounding think tank can work wonders to convince a politician. Brussels hosts numerous not-so-neutral think tanks. Some are heavily dependent on corporate funding, some produce one-off reports for business in return for cash. You see, corporations lobby most effectively when the message they want to push is delivered by several, apparently independent, sources. There may be as many as 30,000 lobbyists in Brussels. That's at least one lobbyist for each person working on policy within the institutions. The majority aren't working for me and you, though. 70% are paid to influence politics for corporate interests. With literally millions of euros at their disposal and privileged access to policymakers, it's hardly a surprise that these armies of corporate lobbyists are so successful in ensuring that policies suit business interests rather than the interests of the general public. Let's see how it works in practice. REACH was the European Commission's ambitious proposal to create rules to protect citizens and the environment from dangerous chemicals. The idea was to require the chemical industry to demonstrate the safety of its products and to substitute chemicals of very high concern with safer alternatives. Frightened by the potential financial impact on their business, the chemical industry launched a multi-million euro campaign to kill off the REACH proposal. The corporate lobby groups started working their revolving doors, with staff moving to and from the very commission department that was writing the legislation, DG Enterprise. Its director, John-Paul Mingerson, was headhunted as general advisor for lobbying giant Business Europe. Meanwhile, chemical multinational BASF was found to be funding advisors within DG Enterprise and seconded more than 200 of its staff members to the German government. A lobbyist from the German Chemical Federation, VCI, also acted as an advisor to key members of the European Parliament. All this gave big chemical corporations privileged access to political information and made it far easier to influence the decisions. Their huge lobbying campaign proved to be enormously successful. REACH entered into force in 2007, but was dramatically watered down, with many loopholes allowing many of the more dangerous chemicals to remain on the market.
Despite its obligation as the executive body of the EU, the European Commission has until now failed in implementing the measures MEPs and Member States have called for. Sweden have been the first country to bring this issue to the European Court of Justice, which recognised the breach of law by the European Commission.
I have to call upon the European Commission, the guardian of the Treaty for the European Union, to respect a ruling of the European Court of Justice and to comply with it. The court's ruling that was crystal clear to say that there was no impact assessment to social economic consequences was necessary before the independent scientific criteria would be set. European Union citizens are losing trust in the European Union, so the last we can use is a European Commission that is not even complying with court's rulings. Thank you.
It is true that the Commission failed its legal obligations to deliver on time. It is our job as policymakers to protect the European Union citizens from the impact of such substances when they have adverse effects. My proposal today is to follow the widely agreed WHO definition of an endocrine disruptor, which states that a substance that has an endocrine mode of action which consequently causes an adverse effect. It is true that this definition has been defined some time ago. However, I would like to point out that it has not been easy to agree on how to legislate and make the criteria operational in our approval process. Substances identified as endocrine disruptors are banned unless very strict derogations apply.
Not every lobbying story ends that way. Take bees, for example. Bee populations in Europe have been in sharp decline, posing a real problem for our ecosystems and ultimately the food on our plates. So protecting these pollinators is essential. In 2012, British and French researchers published evidence suggesting pesticides called neonicotinoids were linked to the decline of bee colonies. The European Commission proposed a partial and temporary ban. Sure enough, two of the companies producing neonicotinoids waged an all-out lobbying war against the ban. They sent menacing letters to the EU Food Safety Authority, scaremongered about losses to agriculture, and produced biased studies. Another pesticide company, BASF, used a front group called Bees Biodiversity Network to greenwash its activities. The network, for example, co-organised an exhibition at the European Parliament, playing down the harmful role of pesticides and stressing other causes for the bees' decline. But in this particular case, the public was informed and engaged, and under pressure of public opinion, politicians were finally forced to stand up to big industry. The European Commission went ahead with its proposal, and a clear majority of EU countries supported it. 3 of Bayer and Syngenta's pesticides, which had been linked to the decline in bees, were banned, at least temporarily. And so it is that big business interests capture the policy agenda, ensuring that European laws time and time again serve the interests of large corporations above those of the people of Europe. That is, unless those people speak out.